Hi, and welcome to another episode of Hot Takes with me, the Silver Fox. Now, I've not touched upon the Amber Gibson story so far, because as the trial went on, I found it very, very upsetting. I didn't like what had happened to her. I thought what had happened was truly tragic and awful. But now that the trial's over, there is a question that arises, and that is one of punishment. We have a problem that her brother, a 19-year-old fully grown man, he sexually abused her. He then took her life, lied about it, hid the body. And because he's under 25, he will, because of Scots law, not receive the full punishment. How can this possibly be justified? How can doing these things not result in the strongest possible sentence? We've already seen how Sean Hogg, committed the most terrible thing, R-ing a child, and then walks free from court with 270 hours of community service. What price justice? Who speaks for Amber? Now, the whole case was upsetting. Apart from what happened to her, of course, the man who then found her then went on to abuse her corpse. He is waiting trial. He will be given a sturdy sentence because, of course, he's over 25. And it may even end up that he receives a stronger, longer sentence than the grown man that ended her life. How can this possibly be right? It isn't. This man, this 19-year-old man, we're going to go into this anyway, but this 19-year-old man, his father this year also went to prison for 10 years for R-ing a woman. So it seems to be genetic. And this is what happens if we introduce the rope, then a lot less of this will happen. And certainly nobody will commit it twice. And this is one of the other things. We're outside of the EU now. EU membership says that you must not have a death penalty. We're not in the EU. There's nothing stopping us from reintroducing the rope. And I think it's about time we did. Anyway, we're going to have a look at this story. It does upset me, but I think it's important to look at not from what happened with regards to the crime, but what's likely happening with regards to the punishment of the crime. So here goes. Now, before we just get into this part, I will just say that it seems to be Humza Yousaf has this desire to reduce punishments for this sort of crime. He doesn't want anyone under 25 to be harmed. Let's just legalise everything. It's all part of his push to legalise and sexualise children, to legalise the abuse of children, to make the punishments less, until eventually it just becomes the norm. And you have to ask, why does this man want to normalise P? Seems very odd, doesn't it? Till you think about it, then it doesn't seem very odd at all. Anyway, Amber Gibson's murder may highlight injustice of Scotland's soft-touch sentencing reforms. After the lenient sentences handed to young R-ers of women and killer drivers in recent months, this could be the sternest test yet for the soft-touch rules that say rehabilitation rather than punishment must be the priority for under 25s. When this under 25 watches his own father go down for 10 years for R-ing a woman, I think rehabilitation is already too late. The brother of tragic Amber Gibson has been warned he will pay a heavy price for the teen's sex assault and the taking of her life in Hamilton's Cadzow Glen in November 21. Connor Gibson, 20, will return to the dock in September when he will be handed a mandatory life sentence for a crime described by Lord Mulholland as depraved. It is. And you have to look to the parents here, don't you? You have to look at why they brought a child up that would do that to his own sister. I think in this case, nurture over nature. But there's certainly a lot of nature when you consider the father is guilty of very similar crimes. So this child growing up has looked at the father and he's taken his direction there. So that behaviour is set in this man. That cannot be unlearned. So this man will represent a danger for the remainder of his life. And so I think in this case life does mean life. And I think we could save the taxpayer a lot of money if life meant 6 foot of rope. But that's just my view on that. Under the Sentencing Young People Guidelines, introduced in Scotland in January 22 by the then Justice Minister, who wants to see soft touch for any kind of crime against children, the judge is required to make rehabilitation rather than punishment a primary consideration for all those aged under 25. Don't care. They commit the crime, they do the time, or preferably for crimes like this, they dangle. By the age of 19, you know the law. There's no excuse. There is nothing in the guideline that says that the taking of a life is an exception, and there will be keen interest in how long Gibson will be told he must serve before being considered for parole. Oh, it'll be something silly, 10 years, if that. He might be out in 8. Seriously. Doing what he did, and he could be out walking the streets in as few as 8 years, if not less. I wouldn't be surprised if it was less. We know that people who are children can escape prison under these new rules because of the scandalous example of Sean Hogg, which I mentioned in the intro, who was ordered to carry out 270 hours of unpaid work for a sex attack on a 13-year-old girl in a park in Dalkeith in Mid Lothian. And although the Crown Office is now considering the sentence, he is far from the only example of a young sex offender who's been given a more lenient punishment because he was under 25 at the time of sentencing. I tell you, if it was my daughter, he would want to be in jail. He would be begging to be in jail. I'm not a doctor, but I would keep him alive for quite some time. That's all I would say on that. He would be begging to get into prison. I would certainly have a jar, and in it would be his junk. Or consider the case of Stephen McKilcombe, who was killed by a hit-and-run driver in Wishaw on New Year's Day in 2020. Last November, Brian Buchanan pled guilty to causing death by careless driving and failing to stop at Hamilton Sheriff Court. He was handed a 3-year driving ban and ordered to do 300 hours of unpaid work and tagged for 6 months. He killed someone. He ended the life of an innocent person, and he gets effectively nothing. 300 hours of unpaid work. Is that the value of a human life? Now, if you think minimum wage is, say, £10, just over, but call it £10 for the sake of easing, that's £3,000, isn't it? No. Yes, that's £3,000. Now, if we consider that minimum wage is, say, £10, we'll make it £10 for the sake of easy maths, and he was given 300 hours of unpaid work. That prices a human life at £3,000. Is that what the Scottish legal system says a human being is worth? £3,000. That's how little the SNP value human life. That you can take a life. It's £3,000. That's it. Before Connor Gibson learns his fate for the ending of the life and the taking of the life and assault with intent to his sister, however, another young killer is due to be sentenced for his crime. Daniel Haigh, 18, ended the life of Justin McLaughlin, 14, during a broad daylight attack in Glasgow High Street Station. He's due back in the dock in August, and while he too faces a mandatory life sentence for the taking of a life, the punishment part could be reduced significantly because of his age. Haigh was 16 at the time. I don't think that matters. I think at 16 you're old enough. Bang. 30 years. Give them the choice. 30 years or the rope. Don't care. In fact, no, for taking a life, just give them the rope. Just give them the rope. Gibson was 19 years of age when he hard and strangled his 16-year-old sister in South Lanarkshire before her semi-naked body was then interfered with by another man. Stephen Corrigan, 45, is also likely to face a long jail sentence after he was convicted of a breach of the peace and attempting to defeat the ends of justice. However, he will not receive the benefit of the Sentencing Young People Guidelines. This means that the man who found the body and then just gave it a quick interfere with, basically, abused her again, will end up doing more time in prison than the brother who hard and ended her life. How is that possibly right? How is this in any way justice? We need to get Humza Yousaf in a court of law at this point to explain why, to the judge and therefore to the people, why he thinks crimes like this are not important, why human life is worth £3,000, and why people like Connor Gibson should not do the remainder of their life in prison. Amber and her brother were fostered by Craig and Carol Niven, who said, "We now have one daughter buried in Larkhall Cemetery and another child in prison. We really miss Amber. Life will never be the same again." In a dignified statement delivered outside the court, they added, "We are relieved the people involved in what happened to her are now behind bars. However, no amount of time will be justice enough for such a young, innocent life. No, the only justice is either a 6-foot drop or he spends every single day of the remainder of his life behind bars in a tough prison. And maybe, with a bit of luck, he will be somebody's bitch in prison. And he'll know. I just hope he has lots and lots of really rough, hard sex. I hope he gets sex 8, 10, 20 times a day. I want him begging. Young lad like that, they'll knock his teeth out. Gives a better BJ. Hope they do. I hope he gets everything coming to him. I really do. But they need to lock Humza Yousaf in a cell with him. Because if that guy, he doesn't get life in prison, if he doesn't get the full sentence for this girl's life, then there is no justice in Scotland. And I'm stopping and I'm coming up. I hope those wild-eyed, foaming at the mouth, loony SNP voters look towards Amber Gibson and say, that is terrible, that is awful, you wouldn't want that to happen to my daughter. And then look and say, well, actually, if it did happen to my daughter and the person who did it only got a very short sentence, who could I possibly blame? Who's the one person that's caused this? Who's the one person that's going to allow this man to go relatively unpunished, or at least a very soft punishment? It's Humza Yousaf. We all know it. We all know his perpetual push for the easing of crime against children because of his desire to ensure that children are no longer protected and are therefore vulnerable and then easy to do what you wish to them. It's the only excuse for everything that he's done. I mean, if you can R a child and walk free from court, thanks to Humza Yousaf and his push for that easing, then of course there is no hope, is there? There is no justice. Without justice, there's no society, ultimately. I think that's what the SNP want. I think they want a total destruction of Scotland. Otherwise, they'd do something about it. But they're not. They're doing the complete opposite of what the vast proportion of people want. And so it's up to the people to get rid of the monstrosity that is the SNP. Anyway, I shall stop now. Thank you very much for listening. It's a horrible video and I don't like doing it, but I felt it was important. If you like what you see here on the channel, please hit the subscribe button, ring the bell, leave a like, leave a comment, please share the video. And until next time, stay safe, stay well, and for heaven's sake, protect your children, often from other children. Goodbye.